All right, it's 7 p.m. Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation. I'm Miller Smith, President-elect of the CAOMS, and I'm pleased that you are able to join us for our fourth webinar this year. Although we began these webinars in the spring when we were all at home, we realized that this is an effective way of delivering education to our members and plan to continue with them ongoing throughout the year. The COMS executive engaged with Con and Wolf last fall in an effort to help our association and our members with marketing and communication. Whether we like it or not, social media has become mainstream, and if you have not embraced it, there is no better time to learn about it than now. It is with this in mind that we asked tonight's presenter, Erin Jacobson, head of digital with Con and Wolf, to speak to us on simple steps to grow your business in the digital age. For Erin, prior to joining Con and Wolf, she was the director of communications for the Lake Jack Layton, leading brand standards for the 2011 Canadian federal election. In her role with Con and Wolf, Erin works with clients to develop multi-channel digital strategies that deliver against business objectives, manage issues, and deepen community engagement. Her data-centric approach to audience insights helps solve complex business and organizational problems by taking a user-first approach to channel selection, technology, and content creation. Erin had originally been scheduled to speak to us this past June in St. Andrews, and unfortunately that conference was not able to move forward, but we are delighted that she is able to join us from Toronto for tonight's webinar meeting. Erin will take questions at the end of her presentation, so please feel free to jot them down using the chat function in Zoom and send them directly to our host, Dr. Tony Chahadi. He is going to be the moderator for the Q&A, and he will charge that at the end of Erin's presentation this evening. As a couple of housekeeping items, if everyone can please turn off their own personal cameras and microphones during this session. Otherwise, we will plan to continue to keep you all muted throughout the webinar. At the completion of the webinar and the Q&A, we will move forward into our first virtual annual general meeting for the COMS. I will now turn the microphone and screen over to Erin. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. As Miller said, we are going to spend some time today talking about growing your business leveraging digital channels. So we will talk a bit about social media, we'll talk a bit about search, we'll talk a little bit about websites and how these things work together. I hope that it's relatively straightforward, and certainly, as was pointed out, I'm happy to take questions at the end. As any time I speak with any group about leveraging digital channels, we like to just start by setting the stage of what are the trends we're seeing today that you may or may not know. Of course, COVID has impacted everything. It has also impacted the way people consume content right now. Reports say that social media usage has increased by up to 70%. That is incredibly significant when you consider how much time was already being spent on social media. But this gives me a really good sort of opportunity to point out something I'd like you to keep in mind as we walk through the rest of the presentation, which is, none of this is rocket science. It is entirely based on regular people's everyday behavior. So when you think about how you behave online, the things that you do, that's the same thing that the people we're trying to reach do. So this is a direct impact of people spending more time at home, more time on screens, looking for distractions, scrolling while watching Netflix, distracting themselves from a day sitting, in an uncomfortable chair that wasn't meant to work in all day and trying to find something to occupy their mind. So not a surprising trend. The other thing I'd like to say is, we often hear from people when we're talking to them about social media that, the people I'm trying to reach, they're too old for social media. They're not there. And to that I say, if the queen is on social media, the person you are trying to reach is on social media. And finally, digital influencers, for my business, this is the fastest growing sort of area for us in our day-to-day practice. And that's how we leverage third-party ambassadors to lend their credibility to the businesses and brands that we work for every day. So of course, to my point before, it's common sense. A strong digital presence can be a secret to success for businesses. When you think about, again, your own behavior, if you're looking to validate the credibility of a business that you're looking to engage, the first thing you do is go online. You'd make sure they have, a substantial, credible looking website. Perhaps you check out reviews on Facebook. So it's no surprise, again, that these are one of the benchmarks that people are now looking for to determine sort of credibility or validity of a small business. So we'll walk through a few things in the next sort of 40 minutes or so. We'll talk about awareness and engagement. We'll talk about the kinds of actions people can take, drive, sort of from engagement up to the kinds of actions we'd be looking for people to take within a web environment. And then, of course, customer service. As you begin to expand customer service or client service outside of the practice environment and online, how do we make sure there's sort of continuity of experience and they're getting the same kind of treatment they would expect from you, your clinic or your practice in the online environment as well. So we'll start by talking about awareness. And really the first piece here is content that the right audience is going to notice. And I want to talk about audience for just a minute, because so frequently I hear from people that I just want to reach everyone. I want everyone to know about my business, about our offering. And the reality is there is no one size fits all approach to communications, right? You're always thinking about, who am I talking to? What do I need to tell them? What do they need to hear to believe me or choose me as their service provider? And so, the thing I would ask you to do if you're looking at launching social media channels, or if you already have them and you want to evaluate the efficacy of the content you already create, is to sort of, go through an exercise like you see on the screen. What is the world of individuals that I'm looking to speak to look like? Are they people with existing conditions, reoccurring conditions? Do I want to reach my current clients, prospective clients? The caregivers, the parents or families and friends of those that are seeking treatment, so on and so forth. And as you build that, you start to realize that all of these different individuals are looking for something different from your business and therefore require, a different type of content than the other. So we sort of begin by narrowing this down. Here, for example, you could think, all right, I want to reach prospective clients. What's the best way in or the largest pool there? I may think about that sort of sandwich generation, those that are caring for elderly parents as well as young children at home. These are the primary healthcare decision makers of a family. And then what are the kinds of pieces of content I want to create to reach them? Again, that message would look very different than perhaps a dentist from whom you're looking for a referral. Once you know who you're talking to, the task at hand really is creating the kinds of content that's going to be valuable, discoverable, and top of mind. And when we say valuable, we mean, provide some sort of value to the person who's seeking the content, not just to your business. Discoverable is, is it easy to find if I'm looking for content of this subject? And then top of mind gets into frequency and making sure that you're continuing to be present in the feeds of those who are looking for your content. And so that, again, right, make sure we're offering value, that we're posting at a regular cadence, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and that we're also including relevant hashtags in the content that we're posting on social media channels. When you think about what are the kinds of content that these audiences are going to find valuable, trying to create a space for yourselves online where you become, a go-to resource for information. And that can include content that is debunking myths, that's explaining, procedures. People are incredibly curious to understand how these procedures work. Relevant news coverage that is on the topic of your industry, and then of course demonstrating your own personal expertise, or if you have an area of specialization, there's a great opportunity to stand out from the crowd with content that is related to that as well. When we talk about discoverability and we talk about hashtagging, which may sound perhaps a bit overwhelming, it's relatively simple. Hashtagging is the equivalent to sort of aggregating content under a theme or subject matter and making it easy to find. So if you are going to look for content, from websites, you'd be going to Google and entering something in the search field. If you want to find something on a social media platform in that search field, you'll likely enter a hashtag. And so you don't want to use too many. You want to pick ones that are relevant, that's easy enough to find by looking at content within your own industry from other practitioners or from the CAOMS, and making sure that we're using ones that are already being used. The other thing that's really important here is if you are using tags that are industry specific, you also want to make sure that if that's focused on a patient group, for example, that you're also localizing your content. I understand that there may be certain situations where somebody may travel for treatment, but in all likelihood, they're going to be looking for a local practitioner or engaging with a local oral surgeon. And so, of course, including your city as one of those hashtags is an important step to take as well. That makes sure that the audience that's coming to you is actually relevant to your business and includes a group of people that would either be current patients or possible leads here. Now, I want to take a moment to pause on social media since we're talking about discoverability and talk about search, because 75% of clicks happen on that first page of search results. So in our industry, we talk a lot about the search engine results page. What that is really is the first page of results when you enter something in Google. The reason why that page matters so much is what this number is telling you is that only 25% of people anywhere are clicking to page 2 of search results and finding and going off to a website from a link they're finding there. So if your practice isn't appearing in somebody's search results on that first page, they're very unlikely to actually end up on your website at all. And so there's a couple of ways. These are the ways we're going to talk about today are ways that don't cost you any additional money. Of course, you can do Google ads, keywords. Keyword advertising is a really great way to ensure that you're top of page. But if you don't want to spend the money, you can get really specific with the page titling on your website. So if your website has multiple pages, making sure that the name of every single one of those pages is different gives you an increased likelihood of appearing in search. The other thing to do here is to try to integrate commonly used vernacular into the search or into the language that exists within the copy on your website. I think this is a really important tip for this group, and that's because so frequently in health, wellness, and medical professions, the websites are filled with industry jargon. One, not only is that hard to understand as a regular individual who doesn't have the same level of education, it's also not always the language that people are searching for when they're online. So yes, of course, there will be people who, they've been to their dentist, they've been told, what the condition is they have, and they've had their referral. There's actually a really great moment in that time before their consultation with you and their initial referral where they're going online for more information, and you want to make sure that you're appearing there. If you're not using the kind of language that they may have, which again, possibly is the specific language of the condition for which they're seeking treatment, but in all likelihood is some sort of plain speak synonym that is describing that. You want to be including that language so that when Google uses its machine to sort of search the websites on the internet for relevant information to somebody's search query, you're appearing there. Finally, if you haven't already, creating a Google My Business account to manage your business information. That's what you see up on the screen here. What happens there is when your business appears in a search result, not only is it just happening in that long form list of information, but you're also getting that piece on the side with your phone number, the link to your website, and more information as well. Now, we're going to go back to top of mind, which is something I mentioned we were going to talk about in the context of social media. Posting regularly is so important because, as they say, you sort of teach somebody how to treat you. You also teach somebody what to expect from you. And so in this case, the cadence with which you post should have a sort of regular rhythm to it. You don't want to be posting and then not posting again for 2 weeks, but then posting 3 times. People will forget that they followed you in the first place. This applies to email as well. You can think about how many times maybe you've signed up for an e-newsletter, you haven't heard from them for 2 months, all of a sudden you receive an email in your inbox and you go, I never signed up for that, I'm going to unsubscribe. Whereas if you had received an email right away, it would have been relevant to your interests at the time, and then you would recognize that you were part of this email list and we're going to be receiving ongoing communications. So cadence is incredibly important to stay top of mind and to make sure that that relevance is recognized and remains important. But driving awareness, it's not just about creating that compelling content There's also an opportunity in social in a way that's really affordable to maximize the reach of your content. And this is actually incredibly important in terms of the way that social media channels operate. They've become incredibly smart in understanding that businesses and brands want to interject their content into the posts that everyday people are making. And so they're making it more challenging for businesses to reach people for free on their channels. And what they've done is they've basically said, we're going to limit how effective your content is as a business and essentially force you to pay to reach more people. So organic reach on Facebook can be as low as 2%. What that means, and I'll explain it, is that if you have a Facebook page, everybody who likes that page, let's assume there's 10 people who like that page. I'm sure if you have one, you have more than 10 people who like your Facebook page, but let's just use it because math is not my strength and it allows for a good example here. If there's 10 people who are following your page, there is only ever a chance that 2 people are going to see that piece of content. And nobody who isn't following your page will ever see it. So if prospective clients are people you're trying to reach, or dentists who aren't yet sort of connected with you in a social media environment, but you're looking potentially to secure referrals from, or people you want to reach, then you need to be amplifying your content to make sure that they see it, because less than 2% of people who already follow you will see something you're just posting online organically. So ad posts can have 10 times the impact of an organic post. They can be super affordable. You set your budget here. I can't imagine a world in which any of you need to be spending, substantial amounts of money on your, Facebook advertising, for example. You have a smaller pool that you're trying to reach. They're super user-friendly and easy to set up in the back end of Facebook, and Facebook provides all kinds of free tutorials to help you do that. And they also allow for really, really specific targeting. So you're able to reach the kinds of groups we talked about earlier and serve a specific piece of content to a specific audience. So for example, if you have a piece of content about wisdom teeth extraction, you may not want to, serve that to people over 60, but you do want to serve it to the parents of teens. And so you can actually narrow in your audience pool to make sure that you're serving that ad to parents of teens in a realistic geographical area that surrounds your practice. Now, investing in great content that is informative and valuable is great. Running ads behind, or putting ad dollars behind that content is also important, but we ultimately want to get people to do something. The first thing you want someone to do is to start engaging with that content. And that can look at, a couple different ways. The reason why engagement matters is it sort of demonstrates that the content that you've posted is working, that it is generating interest from the audiences you're creating that content for. And that can look like follows and likes of your social media page. It can be comments or likes on that specific content. It can be shares. It can also be, an increase of direct messages. And Facebook Messenger has become an incredibly important customer service tool on social. And again, I will speak a little bit more about that as we get into customer service later on in today's presentation. But it is worth noting that if you are seeing an increase of volume in comments on your page, or DMs in your Facebook Messenger, that you may want to just put in the sort of, about this page description, a little note about what the hours are that, you or someone from your office is monitoring and responding to comments. So, we respond Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that kind of thing. So people aren't expecting to get responses from you at hours outside of, standard business hours. And again, that's important because social media doesn't exist in the same context that our day-to-day office operations exist. Now, we talked a little bit about vernacular. In order to drive responses amongst digital audiences, you really do need to speak their language. And I can't emphasize enough how much you want to be helpful here and not just sell. It is absolutely okay to promote, a service offering that you have within your practice, but you also want to balance that out with, informational content that is valuable outside of sort of trying to secure a patient, a new or recurring one. Again, we're going to try to avoid industry jargon. Where I would make an exception for that rule, for example, would be if you had a LinkedIn post that was really targeted to your industry peers. Of course, use all the jargon you want, get it out of your system there. And then when you come over to Facebook and you're looking to engage with patients and clients here, we're speaking in sort of common everyday language. Establishing your own unique tone. separating yourself a little bit from your peers. Yes, you you may be an oral surgeon, but you're also a person with a personality and your own interests. And, people do love to know what that looks like and understand who you are. And then, unlike me in this presentation, you want to keep it short. I've heard from my contacts at Facebook that an average person can actually scroll through up to 30,000 feet of content a day. So if you were to take all those sort of scrolls on their mobile device and stretch it out, that's a lot of content to consume. So you want to be able to create something that's sort of, thumb stopping content, and understand that when that thumb, on the phone stops for a second to see that your content is succinct enough and people are going to absorb your message relatively quickly. Really great types of content that can be absorbed quickly, quick snapshot on what a procedure is, an update about your clinic, a quick piece of industry news. These are all really easy, low lifts for you. They're things that you sort of understand already and can create probably, with minimal effort. And they're also content that's of interest to the people you'd be trying to reach. Photos are also great ways, when we talk about thumb stopping content, photos receive an average of 37% more likes and comments than something that's just text. I always like to remind people, again, think about how people behave and think about common sense as it relates to social. So, pre-COVID, and truthfully, I don't have the update since COVID hit, but pre-COVID, 80% of content on social was absorbed through a mobile device. So people were always going to their phones first for social content. In that context, if you want to think about the real estate that you have, and you're seeing my wallpaper here, so I'll just show that off. Think about the real estate that you have. If you're creating those horizontal images that we all used to make, the way that we're used to creating videos, or the way we were used to taking photos in that, landscape orientation, you're taking up very little visual real estate of the mobile device. So think about creating content that is vertical and taking up as much of that screen space as you can. And of course, bright colors are going to be eye-catching. You'd also be surprised to know that, images that have photos of people tend to get more engagement than photos of, images or objects and things like that. Not everybody has, a pro photographer on hand to create custom images. If you do need stock photography, there are free ones that are, better than others. Pexels that you see up on the screen, as well as Unsplash, they're really great go-to resources for free images. You will, of course, stumble across that image elsewhere since it's a free stock photo database, but it does help bring some life to your posts if you don't have the resources to create your own. And I would highly suspect that that's the case for most of you. Videos are the same. Again, make them vertical. When you think about user behavior, how often do you ever turn your screen horizontal to watch a video now? Very rarely. In fact, 72% of millennials refuse to ever turn their phone that way. And that's why, social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok that are geared to a younger audience, they don't even have horizontal mode anymore. Everything is created vertical. Again, it takes up all the real estate and it speaks to the way in which we are consuming content now. The other piece that's really important to know is that almost all videos on Facebook are watched without sound. In fact, 85% of those videos. So if you're spending all of this time doing a talking head, video to camera explaining something, and you don't have captions, or you don't have, a couple of bullets that appear on the side, people are not going to take that information away and absorb it. They're only going to see the sort of picture in picture. So think about how that content is consumed is so important. And finally, I already told you, you have a really finite window of time where you've captured somebody's attention. So you want to keep it short. You want to keep that video to 15 or 30 seconds. And quite frankly, 5 seconds is better. I know it sounds impossible, but I promise you that it is not. It's about creating more videos that are shorter instead of one sort of longer video. Again, the one place where this slightly differs would be for LinkedIn. If you have an informational piece of content that is directed at one of your peers, you can go further in depth. You can create a longer video. And sometimes what we recommend is creating that shorter 15-second video that says, here's a summary of what I'd like to talk to you about. Go watch the long video to find out more and hear more in depth about, whatever it is I might have to say. If if videos feel like way too much commitment for you, GIFs and cinemagraphs are a really easy way to get some of that sort of motion picture feeling into your content. lots of free, open right content that exists online that you can find that allows you to just sort of add a bit of flair to the content you're posting online. Engagement is so important when we're talking about those likes and comments, because the more engagement you have, it demonstrates that implied endorsement of you as a practitioner and your business, right? It helps you stay top of mind. One thing that's also important to note on platforms like Instagram, the more engagement you're getting on your posts, in fact, the more your content is going to appear organically. It's how that algorithm works. So if people are liking and commenting on your content, there's going to be increased organic viewing that might get you higher than that sort of 2% we talked about before. And of course, it's good validation that the content that you're creating is working. And finally, we talk about the word of mouth effect. If people are sharing your content, then you're not just reaching your followers, you're reaching the followers of those who are sharing your content. And it's an implied endorsement of what you've had to say. Now, beyond engagement, there's a lot of other types of action we look to drive online. When we think about your website and the kinds of functionality that could exist there, we're talking about booking an appointment, leaving a review, and subscribing to an e-newsletter. And I am a super fan of email. And the reason for that is, you may think email is old school, or, people don't like hearing from businesses on anything that isn't hyper personal. And that's in fact not true. People do enjoy sort of hearing from people more regularly. And in fact, they've opted in from that content. So this is going to be the most captive audience that you have because they've chosen to hear from you. Now, when it comes to booking online, the reality is, millennials and those younger than millennials, and perhaps even some that are older than millennials, they just hate talking on the phone. They don't want to phone and make an appointment. They'd much prefer to do that online. Ideally through an online booking portal, if not at least through an easy form field that allows them to email. Facebook also offers a book now feature that points directly to your own scheduling system. You can actually connect the two, and it is likely worth looking into if you have the kind of practice that allows people to book directly like that. And finally, on reviews, these are so important because, again, it's endorsements of your abilities as a practitioner and the experience within your practice, and people trust them 12 times more than a description. So you may describe a service offering you have, but if somebody reads a review of you, excelling in that service, someone else is going to trust that much more than your own description. In order to generate more reviews, you can send a follow-up email after an appointment that just, if you're kind of providing aftercare tips, you can always at the end say, and if you liked your experience, don't forget to leave a review. You can leverage your social channels and ask people, if they're current patients, to please, leave a review on your Facebook page or leave a Google review. And of course, if you are doing an e-newsletter, you can do a call out that way as well. I don't need to spend too much time belaboring the point. I already told you that I love email. I love it because there's huge ROI for businesses on email. Again, it keeps you top of mind. It fosters an ongoing relationship and continues. I've talked a lot about continuing that experience from, in practice or in clinic and beyond, and this allows you to do that. So just make sure, whether it's on social or again on your website, that you have a visible subscribe to email link that exists somewhere there as well. Now, social media not only provides that validation, but it also helps you build loyalty. So 62% of millennials say that they're more likely to be loyal to a company if they engage sincerely being key on social media. And again, we talked about being true to yourself and who you are. And that's so important in terms of sincere content. 67% have engaged with a company on social media. And I told you we would get to, why talking about what your response windows are on Facebook are important. 42% of consumers expect a response within 60 minutes. I know, and that is not a realistic expectation. So make sure you're setting that expectation. You can even indicate in your sort of what we call house rules on your social media channel, we respond Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 within 24 hours. And then just make sure that you or your clinic staff know that, you're checking once a day and responding to comments or questions that happen there. Learning more, about their needs and the anticipated solutions for the challenges they face that leads to being able to retain these clients in a long-term, capacity. So, again, these reviews matter a ton. And, making sure that people are signing up also allows you to continue that experience. And finally, the positive reviews, they're just that social proof that so many businesses are looking for, and you have an easy way to generate that based on already having the contact information for so many of these patients. Now, digital customer care, fast response time, we talked about that. Knowing what address, what to address publicly versus privately on your social channels matters a ton. So sometimes someone might post something that actually is, perhaps personal information. You want to thank them for their comment, perhaps publicly on your Facebook page, and then you want to send them a message via Facebook Messenger and ask them to call the clinic or ask them to speak with you directly, so that you're not having, a personal health conversation in a public space. Similarly, there is a thing we call trolls online. Perhaps, there is somebody who had a negative experience or has blown something out of proportion, and they're taking to active comments on your social media channels. This is, again, something you want to try to de-escalate quickly. And the way we do that is we move it into private conversations, we move it into Messenger, or we ask them to make a phone call to our practice. Be ready to use those apps. I've mentioned them a few times. People love businesses who have, a social media response mechanism. The easiest thing for you to do if you're not willing to be, active on Facebook Messenger, because truthfully, it does require a bit of a time commitment, is that you can set up an autoresponder and tell people that, you'll get back to them again within that window, or give them information for how they can contact you. So the tools we're looking at, we've talked about Facebook Messenger. If you have more than one social media channel, in fact, even if you only have one, there's lots of free tools that allow you to monitor those channels, so you don't have to go onto Facebook or go onto Instagram every day. Hootsuite is a really good example. It's a Canadian-owned company, and it allows you to have sort of a social media dashboard. On it, you can monitor your hashtags that we talked about that are relevant to your industry, but you can also monitor your social channels and respond right through the dashboard. So you're not having to open Facebook all day long, all of the time. And finally, Sprout Social, similar to a Hootsuite, it allows you to manage your issues. It allows you to access audience insights and data, and then, do that community engagement, which we do call, social customer service as well. So where do we go from here? Now that I've sped talked my way through social customer service, driving engagement, creating content, and building your audiences, we want to keep the conversation going. It's super important, if you haven't already, to follow the CAOMS on Facebook and LinkedIn. The channels are right here on the screen. And if we can, I think they may already be in the chat as well. The CAOMS has these two great channels. They both provide, different functions. On Facebook, this is a destination for patients who are looking to learn more or understand the field of oral and maxillofacial surgery. It's a resource of information on common procedures that those patients might be looking to learn more information about. It's sharing patient stories and responding to questions. And it really is also, establishing trust and confidence between patients and practitioners. LinkedIn provides, a slightly different function here, because the audience is different, right? And this is a virtual hub for you, for professionals who are looking to connect and get more information. There's updates there on, events like these and learning opportunity, other experiences that you can partake in. It's also a discovery resource. This is a place where you can go to, where the association, but also your peers, are sharing new techniques and studies, and of course, highlights of accomplishments for individuals on this call and beyond. And so before we move into questions, I'd just like to leave this with a challenge, which is, try something new in the next week with your practice's social media channel. It doesn't have to be a big thing. And the more you do it, the easier and more comfortable it will feel for you. And if you do it in small steps, it doesn't feel like a huge time commitment or a big undertaking. Being on social media doesn't mean that you have to be on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. In fact, we can probably write 2 out of your, 3 of them off immediately as not priority channels for you. And then start to add the ones that become secondary to the one that is more patient focused and perhaps more effective at building, that community feeling with your patients and with your prospective clients. Questions? That's it. That's all I got.
Great, Erin. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that excellent presentation. And thank you to our COMS audience for joining us in such great numbers tonight. It's really nice to see nice to see everybody online with us this evening. Erin, that was a great talk. I really enjoy it. As somebody who's fairly active in social media, I think, well, first, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. You mentioned in your last few slides about writing off certain platforms right off the bat. So let's pretend that I'm new to this. I think your focus was on Facebook, right? You think that Facebook is, so my kids say to me, Facebook is dead, Dad. Nobody goes onto Facebook. So obviously my rebuttal to them is that's because you're so young and the audience that I'm looking for is on Facebook, right? Are there any other platforms other than Facebook that you would recommend?
Yeah, and first of all, you're absolutely right. I assume your kids don't make their own health decisions. Right. So, if you're looking to reach the primary healthcare decision maker of a family, which, by the way, is usually mom, but that's not always the case. Facebook is going to be the place where you'll do that. In terms of the other channels that would matter, it depends on goals, right? And I always say I don't want to answer for an entire industry. If you are looking to perhaps increase your profile amongst your peers, undertake thought leadership, LinkedIn is absolutely the place to do that. And that would be my recommendation as a secondary channel. Twitter is really Twitter provides sort of three functions. One is Twitter exists in bubbles. So, my Twitter and your Twitter looks entirely different, right? Mine might have my own industry peers, media that I'm interested in. If you were to look at my Twitter bio, I think it says, I like cupcakes and politics. So my thread is, people who talk about baking and people who talk about last night's US election. Yours would look very different to that. So it's these sort of bubbles of conversation on specific subject matter. Again, you're probably doing that on LinkedIn in a way that's more effective. So that matters a little bit less. Twitter is also what we call the moment in time channel. So if this was an in-person AGM, or if you were at a major conference, Twitter would be the place where the conversation about that conference was happening. So being active, if you want to be active in that conversation, sort of in a 24-hour, 48-hour window, the sort of live tweet is still real, and talking about, the keynote that you're seeing and things like that happens on that channel. And then finally, I would say it's actually a bit of a media relations environment. So Twitter also is a place where journalists speak to each other. They also will make comments about, I'm looking for an expert on X. So follow, if you're on Twitter, you should be following, and you want to raise your media profile, for example, you would be following the types of journalists that cover the issues that are relevant to oral surgery or, health and the medical professional in general, and looking for those opportunities. But that's a very long answer to say Facebook would be primary for patients and LinkedIn for industry.
Right. So one of the first questions that I received from one of our guests tonight is, and I think you touched upon the issue of negative reviews. Can you just recap briefly what to do? What, your initial response is, oh no, I've made myself vulnerable by being online. I've opened myself up to some mentally unstable, potentially person, right? So what do you do about those things?
The first is to not overreact. I think there's also different scenarios, right? There's a scenario in which somebody has left you a negative review, and then there's a scenario in which somebody has left you a negative review and is commenting on every Facebook post you have about how horrible you are and, all of these other issues that they have. And that's the troll. And that's the sort of do not engage with that person at all, because all you will do is escalate the problem. It is absolutely appropriate, by the way, if there is if there is mistruths or misinformation or incredibly aggressive behavior, that would include things like racism, swearing, and coarse language, things like that. You can absolutely delete and hide those comments. But when it comes to just somebody who has left a negative review, truthfully, the best thing you can do is, respond to that review, assuming that's not a troll and it's somebody who's just talking about that experience. We're sorry you had, you didn't have the best experience. We'd love to hear more from you. Please call our office. That kind of just, standard business reply, and then do the best you can to encourage positive reviews to push that negative one down.
Right. So speaking for the average listener, my colleagues out there who have very busy lives in clinical practice, one of the first steps of trying to be efficient is sometimes outsourcing something that you can outsource and take it off your desk because of the limited number of hours we have in our lives and in our workday. So, technically speaking, the first thing that comes to mind when I'm listening to this, the amount of information you just transmitted, I can imagine somebody being a bit overwhelmed by the notion of getting embarked in social media marketing. Do you have any tips on how to outsource this type of project for one's clinical practice?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really wide spectrum of investment for that. One is, that if you have sort of front desk staff with more time on their hands, again, you don't necessarily have to outsource if that's something that they can pick up or have an interest in doing. Again, you don't necessarily want to force something that isn't their job, but if they have an interest in that, that's a really easy way to have somebody who's already engaged with your business, do that first draft of content. And then all you have to do is sort of take a look at it and make sure that since it's coming from you, that you're good with it. But from an outsourcing perspective, there's lots of independent consultants who do these kinds of things. I don't know that anybody here, and maybe you do, would need the sort of support of a larger agency. Of course, that's what we do. But we can also, I'm sure the team, and some of them are on the call today, would be happy to point people in the direction of some of those more, individual sort of consultants that work with small businesses all the time.
Okay. There's another question that was just asked, which I think is interesting and might dovetail into something else that we might want to discuss at the level of the CAOMS. And the question is from our Executive Director, Pierre Landry. Is patient recruitment and practice building the only or main endpoint, or are there other benefits for becoming media engaged?
Sorry. Apologies if I just coughed into the headphones there.
No, just kidding.
Good. Just like there's multiple audiences, there's objectives for each of those audiences, right? So at the very beginning, we did talk about patient recruitment and retention, but we also talked about relationships with dentists and others who may refer business. Yes, that sort of falls into patient recruitment, but the relationships that you have with that audience go beyond that. Then again, we have also talked about the relationship and reputation in an industry context. That's a great, use of social media as well, particularly if you have, a new technique or a study that you've participated in building. And apologies if all of my language here is incorrect. Clearly not a practitioner myself. But social media is a great place to be able to talk about ideas, promote the kinds of things that you're doing, and set yourself apart, demonstrate that you are a part of, while also setting yourself apart from the crowd in your own field.
Okay. Excellent. So you and I spoke off camera earlier about what we're doing at the CAOMS, and I just want to take 30 seconds to plug the notion that, for those of you out there that are worried about having to generate their own content, if I could, get into your minds and manipulate what you do on your computers, the first thing I do is get somebody to set up, for example, a Facebook account, right? And that Facebook account, if you're concerned about privacy settings, has parameters that can protect your privacy to a certain extent. And you can set up I guess, would it be a Facebook page, for example? Mm-hmm. And you can actually share content that we at the CAOMS in our social media campaign are generating on Facebook and on the LinkedIn channel, but you can share the content on Facebook for free, essentially, by sharing it to your own Facebook pages. And the reason I bring that up is that there's, while on we're still in the very early phases of our social media campaign at the COMS in our Facebook and LinkedIn pages. I think that we would benefit collectively as a specialty by benefiting from the amplification of all of us sharing our content on our own Facebook, on our own social media channels, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say too, you asked me the question earlier about, this could feel overwhelming. Where would I start? If you're thinking, at the beginning, I want to make 3 posts a week on social media. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 great ideas and I have no idea what the third one is. Going to the CAOMS page and just picking a piece of content that's already there and sharing that, it's going to be, relevant to your field, and that it's trustworthy content to share. It's a really easy way to hit that sort of rounded out number for the week in content. And I would add it goes 2 ways, right? The more of your members that are active on social, the more content you have to share on your own channels featuring your members, just as much as they can share the content that you're sharing on yours.
Right. Excellent. So in terms of the frequency of posting, you mentioned 3 times a week. Is there somebody's asking me to keep the media presence rolling and current? What is the frequency of posting or content renewal that would be required?
We typically recommend 3 to 5 a week.
Okay, great. Good. Just gonna check a couple of things. Erin, I know you were supposed to originally present to us at our annual meeting, I think this past June, that got canceled, and it's a shame that we weren't able to have all of our members meet you in person, but I'd like to commend you on the job you did with this virtual presentation. It's certainly, as we've all experienced, it's a platform that we've all migrated to by necessity, and I'd like to thank you sincerely for your presentation. I'd just like to highlight to everybody to stick around because we're moving into our annual general meeting. So I see that we definitely have a quorum of the minimum. We have 64 people online with us, which is great. So I'd like to thank you, Erin and Rebecca and the company Con & Wolf for helping navigate us through our COMS social media endeavors. And with that, thank you very much, Erin. Have a great evening, and I hope to see you soon. And I'm going to turn things over to our outgoing president, Kevin McCann. Thank you so much.
Thank you.